Jesus.
I lived 8 years as Laura Jensen until I woke up and realized that it was totally insane to live this out.
Okay, that's your personal choice, brother or sister. I don't really know. It's called I Became Transgender. Here's why I regret it. This is from the Daily Wire, so obviously it's going to be really good. It's going to give us a lot of good perspectives.
The first time that it happened in the 50s was Christine Jorgensen, but Jenner took it to the next level, and then 2015 it began to explode.
Jenner's a little hot. It's weird.
Are you a woman?
Yes, for all intents and purposes, I am a woman. My brain is much more female than it is male.
Ladies and gentlemen, the courageous, the stunning Caitlyn Jenner.
It is so weird though that like a trans woman won Woman of the Year. It's also interesting because Caitlyn Jenner like didn't have to struggle the same way that a lot of other. This is one of the big criticisms for Caitlyn Jenner from some of the trans community. Obviously, the fact that she's conservative is part of it, but there's also part of it that's that she didn't have to struggle. She didn't struggle in the same way that like other trans people struggled. She had the capacity, the financial capacity, to be able to transition and like be very passable, which is a big deal.
Ruining an entire generation of children. I find even hearing about it and reading about it so repugnant and so destructive to children.
Trans members of this family all love each other so proudly, and they all
bringing drag.
I mean, it's cringe, but I just wouldn't let my kid watch it. It's a fucking hot take. I just wouldn't let my kids watch that Blue's Clues episode. I don't care.
Performers together with little kids,
and I wouldn't allow my kid to do this. Like, this is fucking weird. I mean, you do you, but I'm not gonna. Like, I feel like that's your reaction you have. Like, no, thanks.
Kind of a perfect relationship.
There are people whose gender might be a little bit of both, or might even be neither.
And it's time that this stuff needs to end. We need men and women to step up and say, stop this nonsense.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Okay. You know, my upbringing was pretty much a typical California upbringing in Los Angeles in the early 40s. It wasn't really anything remarkable. At least not until my dad began to take me over and drop me off at my grandma's house. Grandma was a seamstress and made dresses. And I became very curious about her work, and my curiosity led to her making me a purple chiffon dress that she made just to fit my perfect little 4-year-old body. You know, at first it felt really exciting to have somebody telling me how wonderful and cute I was. But what I didn't realize was happening is the second Grandma began to tell me how cute I looked in that purple dress, what she was really saying was that there was something radically wrong with the little boy that I really was. And so that begins this sort of creepy kind of psych.
I mean, I wouldn't let my boy wear a dress, but I'm a little confused. Listen, here's one of the problems, bro. I think people don't understand is that it doesn't take just one instance for like a kid to be like, I'm fucking trans. It's like a pattern, right? So the kid, this guy as a kid wearing a dress isn't the exclusive thing that made this individual think that they were trans. There's a general reinforcement, a consistent reinforcement, usually that they're not their own gender, or you know, something happens where they have like consistent thoughts and feelings. Because for the most part, if your kid was like, "Oh my god," if you're like a boy, and they were like, "I'm a girl," and like, you could literally just be like, "Okay, whatever," and like they'll get over it. They'll just move on. Like most kids are just fucking annoying. They're just screaming constantly. No, I know he's talking about adult influence, but making a dress for a boy isn't going to be the only thing that's going to impact them. Right? It's a dress for a boy.
Psychological and emotional destruction that starts with inside a young boy, 4 years old, who doesn't know what the consequences are going to be about putting on a dress at 4 years old. And keeping it a secret from my parents for nearly 2 years, until I became so accustomed to wearing that purple dress that I decided to take the dress home so that I could put it on when my parents weren't watching or when I was alone, and I could sort of listen and hear those affirmations.
Damn, it must have fit for 2 years, 4 to 6. Would you not grow?
Became sort of addicted to the affirmations and hearing her say how cute I was. So I had the purple dress at home, but my mom found it in my bottom dresser drawer.
Okay.
And she said, "Well, where did you get this dress?" And I said, "Well, Grandma made it." And that just blew the house up. My dad was upset. My mom was upset. Okay. It was supposed to be a secret. I broke the secret. And as a result of that, I could not go back to Grandma's house without my mom or dad being with me. Okay. Dad didn't know what to do. His mother-in-law had just been cross-dressing his young boy. He was so angry at my grandmother that he took his anger out in his discipline on me, and he started hitting me with a hardwood floor plank.
Yeah, so it sounds like the dress didn't make you confused. It sounds like your dad beating the fuck out of you is what fucked you up. We kind of like, we see how like the real issue here. Like, listen, I personally would be not happy if my mom was giving my young son a fucking dress. But I think that the greater issue here is less the dress and more the massive amounts of abuse that this guy's telling us that he received. But somehow that's like trans people's fault that his dad beat the fuck out of him. Like, what the fuck? I'm just confused.
When I would do something wrong, sometimes he was just being way too critical, but it was what was built up in him because of what happened to me. He didn't.
Bro, shut the fuck up, bro. Seriously, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but dude, you're really just like, yeah, the constant physical abuse from my father, that wasn't the problem. It was this fucking pink dress. What? Bro, come on. Really? You expect me to listen to this and go like, you know what? You're right. It's justifiable for him to beat the fuck out of his kid. That's true. No, man, I think that's the problem. I think your dad beat the fuck out of you, bro, and that's the problem.
Not know what to do. If you can imagine in 19.
Why am I against my son wearing a dress? Why aren't boys allowed to have pretty things? Because dresses are for girls. I don't know. I mean, like we can have this profound conversation. I'm a little more of a traditionalist. I don't want my young boy wearing a dress. As 4 years old. I mean, it's like kids will literally, the overwhelming majority of kids, you're literally responsible for everything on your kid. Like, from the moment that they're born, you're making decisions for your child. Like, oh, like, I'm going to give my fucking kids, like, dinosaur stuff. You know what? You might not do that. You want to give your kid a dress? I don't give a goddamn. So, like, it's my responsibility. I don't want my boy to be feminine. Honestly. I'm not trying to be rude. And, like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with feminine men. But, like, my kid's not an activist. Like, why? I'm not gonna be like, yeah, guys, you can be feminine. Like, if my kid gets older and they're like, I like fucking painting my nails, and then okay, you know what? You start doing you. Like, you want to explore yourself. But if it's like if they go, I want to wear a dress, and I'm like, no, and that's all it takes, which usually it does, then like it's not that big of a deal, you know. It's not that big of a deal. Not every single decision a young boy or a young kid wants to make is like this profound life-changing experience where it's like, if I don't do this, I'm gonna have gender dysphoria. A lot of times, kids are just running around screaming, throwing their fucking shit on the wall, and like, I want to do this. You know, it's not really that deep sometimes. So, you know, I mean, it's my job to raise my kid. So, you know, if he's like fucking 14, he's like, I want to wear a dress. I'm like, all right, maybe we do that. Maybe at home. We'll start at home. But you probably shouldn't do it in public because people will criticize you. It's not right, but it's life, and I don't want you to get fucking criticized. You know? But we will operate from that perspective. So, there you go.
1946, 47, there's no information about kids wearing dresses. But the next part of the equation was...
Usually when I don't know what I'm doing and there's no readily available information, I just start beating the shit out of people within my vicinity. I'm like, I don't understand taxes! And I just start smacking the fuck out of everything around me. Taking it out of like my wife, beat the shit out of her. Because I don't understand taxes. What's an NFT? And I just start punching the fuck out of her. You know what I mean? Like, it's totally normal to do shit like that.
His adopted brother, Uncle Fred, heard about me wearing the purple dress, and Uncle Fred decided that I was fair game to be sexually abused. Uncle Fred was not playing with a full deck of cards.
Yeah, so far, like, this is terrible, but, like, right now, the dress is the least of this guy's problems, man. It's really terrible, but, like, this is the last issue is the dress.
And he'd get drinking a little bit, and he would come looking for me, and he would molest me. The emotional and psychological issues that I had from Grandma affirming me, I didn't really realize.
I just feel like you're upplaying the fuck out of Grandma. I don't like what Grandma did, but Grandma didn't molest you or beat the fuck out of you. Sounds like your grandmother raised two worthless kids, though. I'm not trying to be an asshole, but if you're gonna beat your kid and molest kids, you're a fucking loser piece of shit. But like the dress thing, probably the least of her sins in life.
Consequences of those for many years. The hardwood floor plank obviously was very devastating. And then the sexual abuse was sort of the cherry on top of the cake. I was a broken child before I was 10 years old. You know, I decided that maybe I should have been a
this person's family failed them, yeah.
Girl. Not realizing that what I was trying to do was escape the abuse, not actually change who I was. But it resulted in me.
You just admitted that that's the problem was the abuse, not the dress. I'm fucking confused. Why is what the fuck is this video?
Going through this process for many years of cross-dressing, going out in public as a female. And so I went through this even in my first marriage. I had 2 children. I was an executive for American Honda Motor Company. I worked on the Apollo space missions as an associate design engineer. But that purple dress, the hardwood floor plank, and the sexual abuse was about to take everything away. Then the next critical step was struggling
Maybe the lack of therapy is what failed you. Did we go to like a therapist? I don't
with my
know.
identity. I went to a gender specialist in San Francisco who promptly identified me with gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder and promptly told me that I needed hormones and surgery. That was the treatment that he was prescribing to help me end the cycle of the stress I was having about my gender.
It sounds like you had a really garbage dog shit therapist. So I've talked to a therapist who specializes in this. I really wish I had the conversation. I don't know why I didn't upload it. I'm fucking. But it was actually very interesting. He was talking about how like a good therapist that deals with this kind of shit, the first step that they'll take is they'll identify what you need as an individual, because there are people with gender dysphoria where their treatment isn't necessarily to transition. It's actually might be to like identify and remain the gender that you were born with, identify your gender with your biological sex. It depends on like the severity and the individual's like wants, needs, and desires. So if this person was just like, yeah, you have gender dysphoria, but they're just a worthless therapist. But it sounds like so far you've been failed by everything. It's not the fault of it's so I find it really interesting that this person was like really ready to forgive their father for beating the fuck out of them because of lack of education on trans shit. But you're not going to criticize the therapist, or you're not going to give the therapist a break for a lack of education on trans issues either, because that's what it really boils down to. And it's horrible. This person's a victim of their own life, but like it doesn't mean that it's it's not transgenderism that's the issues.
Because of what happened to me as a young child. The doctor I went to, his name is Dr. Paul Walker. Dr. Paul Walker.
Well, that's why he died in a car crash, because he was a bad therapist. He was a bad fucking gender therapist.
Was a homosexual transgender activist. He felt his job was to do like they're doing today, is to introduce people to hormones and surgery as a process of treatment. Now, keep in mind,
It can be. It depends on the person.
Paul Walker was not just your average therapist. Dr. Paul Walker was the author, the primary chairperson and author of the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care, the very same standards of care that's being used today that's called WPATH standards of care. His agenda was pushing transgenderism, pushing surgery, and pushing hormones
sounds bad.
recklessly and really damaging someone's life like mine. I had kind of a devastating run of events. When I was struggling with alcoholism and drug addiction, I went into a treatment facility as Laura Jensen and came out the other side, and I went through a 2.5 or 3 hour therapy session with my psychologist. And during that day, I went through all of the things that had happened, the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, the wrong idea about going through this procedure, all the things I'd done wrong, the destruction I did to my children and my ex-wife. And I wrote everything down after speaking about that.
I wonder what the destruction is. Is it because you were trans, or did they just pass on the cycle of abuse from their father? Because that happens sometimes. People pass on the cycle of abuse.
These issues, and he put a match to those yellow line paper, and in the parking lot, and those papers began to burn, and the wind gently picked up the flame, and the papers were burned up, and it was sort of that cathartic moment where you realized, okay, all of that stuff now is lifted off of my shoulders. And he said, let's go back into my office and let's pray. Well, I'll be honest with you, this guy prays a lot, and he prays for a long time, and I did not want to go back in and pray with this guy because I figured I'd be there for like an hour praying, and as he
I think he's trying to point out that sometimes parents and others push people into it rather than them wanting to do it because it's what they want. Like the grandmother and the doctor. I've read several stories about kids whose parents force them to dress like the opposite gender than the hormones. Yeah, so the problem with that is that like I know the Daily Wire and I know the people in the Daily. Like it's not like hard to know these people. Like they make content. They don't like trans people. So if I was making the video, then you might expect like a nuanced take about how there can be a very big issue with support systems for trans kids or trans adults failing them, like therapists who are too forceful into transition, or abusive parents, or sexual assault, right? So like if I made the video, we can make that assumption, but they're not making that. They're not making that. They're not saying that. They're not saying like, yeah, there can be issues, but I'm generally affirming of trans people. They're trying to conflate all trans issues down to like this person and this person's experience, and they're like how they were failed. And that's just simply not the general experience of trans people. Like I it's just not. Like there was a huge issue. Like the mom, like the grandma introduced the dress. Okay, but then the dad beat the fuck out of him. The uncle molested him. And then they had a therapist that by their own account, like led them to just like go right through surgery and not actually deal with underlying issues because of a lack of like mental health focus, which I'm not surprised with, because that was when this person was younger, and mental health is still a growing field that's like not even perfect yet. So like, yeah, I don't think that that's, True. Are there studies that correlate abuse and transgenderism? I don't know. Maybe. I think there's studies that for some people like abuse and like being gay. Let's see. The vast majority of sexual assault survivors who responded to the last survey were assaulted as children or youth. So let's just, I don't know. I'm not going to look at it. It's possible that there is a sexual assault associated with some trans people. It's possible. Let's say that there is like a heavy correlation. It doesn't really matter because events in your life shape you as an individual. So it doesn't really change anything. And there are also, I'm going to assume, a ton of sexual assault survivors who are identifying as trans, which means that some of these people, they might have predispositions to being trans. Like that's how gambling works. Like if you give there are people with like gambling brains where if you introduce them to gambling, they'll become addicted very quickly. But if you never introduce them to it, that'll never happen. So like even if we make the assumption that there's a trigger of sexual assault for some people, it's possible that they still have a brain that's wired to like have a predisposition towards being trans if they introduced by some traumatic life event. But even if they don't, like, and we went through a reasonable process, like a very good process of like mental health evaluation and basically trying to make this person happy. What does it matter if somebody's trigger for being trans is being sexually abused? Like, why does that make that treatment any less valid if that's the treatment that they need? Like, mental health is very complicated and a lot of different things can influence people. Like a lot of child molesters, how we're molested as children. It's very, you know what I'm saying? Like these things, and they're just like, these things happen and they're not just changeable. It doesn't just go away. Like, oh, we figured out what happened, so I guess that everything's fine. No, that you have to manage your symptoms in some capacity, or you have to manage yourself. So it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the affirmation of some people being trans. I'm just saying, like, I think that it's very interesting to bring that up, the potential fact, but it doesn't, I think a lot of people would say, well, trans people were just abused and that's why they're trans. So like, it's not really valid, but that doesn't mean anything really, because we're all a mixture of biological and life experiences. And that's what crafts us into the person we are. And we even ourselves would have issues changing small things about ourselves, you know? And like, this is a big thing, being trans, you know what I'm saying? So it's not like you could just completely dismiss the issue.
He prayed. I kept hearing him and I kept thinking, is he going to end? And then there was a point in time when I couldn't hear him praying anymore. And miraculously, what I saw at that moment,
God cured his transgenderism, yeah.
Moment that I couldn't hear his voice was I saw the Lord Jesus Christ actually descending toward me with his arms stretched out.
See?
And I looked in front of me and I saw that he was reaching toward a little baby. And I looked at the baby and I go, that baby is me.
Wow.
The Lord is coming to claim me.
Lord is coming. I knew it.
And he turned to me and said, your life will be safe with me forever. And the Lord disappeared. I realized at that very moment, the Lord came to redeem and restore my life so that I will serve him.
That's great.
Every day after that date. I wanted to restore my life, bring myself back to reality. So faith played the pivotal role in me being here today.
That's why they chose him. Yeah, you know what? I will say that we don't listen to detransitioners enough. I have a friend that's a detransitioner, and she fucking is. She actually had somewhat of a similar story where, you know, she began to transition. And they said that they were pushed through the process very quickly, and it was very confusing, and it fucked them up. And you know, so yeah, like we don't listen to detransitioners enough, for sure. It's a problem. But again, like that's not the perspective that this is taking. This is taking like all you need is fucking God and Jesus, and it's don't give your kids a dress or it's gonna make them turn trans. You know what I mean? It's just not. You know, this is, to me, if anything, this is more of a. You know, this should be more of a warning call against abusing children. But apparently the issue is being trans.
35 years sober, married 24 years, and I detransitioned over 30 years ago. Thank the Lord, I've been very successful in providing help to many people. I haven't been able to help everybody, but I've been able to help a lot of people, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm going to continue to speak out. I'm going to continue to work. I'm going to continue to try to help people who have no other place to turn. And so I started a website called sexchangeregret.com. And
okay, that's aggressive. Let's see if it's in the thing.
I work every single day with either a parent.
They didn't even put the thing in here. Why didn't you put the link in there?
A father, a transgender who has regret like I did. I work with psychologists. I work with college professors. I work with doctors. I work with lawyers.
Okay.
I am working to prevent people from going through this totally unnecessary, insane surgical procedure And that's why I'm so passionate about trying to raise my voice and give people the opportunity.
Well, it's nice, but like we read this, and this is obviously like a very anti-trans message from this person, and yet their own statistics says up to 20% have regrets about their sex change. Sex change are not effective, but the thing is if let's say like 20% have an issue with it, that means 80% don't. So it means that sex change would be pretty effective. That's a reasonable effectiveness rate. But this could also be like an issue with like the way that the sex change happened, or the potential for those individuals to have set higher standards for themselves than they thought. 10 to 15 years after surgical reassessment, the suicide rate is 20 times that. So this is probably not true. It's probably the suicides attempt rate, which is what we don't really get. But the problem is like, what would the attempt rate have been if they didn't transition? The hot take that there are a lot of mental health issues associated with being trans. It's not a hot take. So it's possible like that some of these things are just like a lot of people falling through the system, but these people might have taken their lives regardless. So the idea that your treatment will work I think is a little bit insane. Like, you know, there's just mental health issues associated with being trans in general. Like if you actually look into it, there's trans people, it's not really just like gender dysphoria that would necessarily be the issue. There's also like anxiety and depression and a lot associated with them being trans. So it doesn't really necessarily mean like people are trans regardless of whether you like it or not. You know, it's the treatment method that we're looking at, and we could be better on the treatment method, but that doesn't mean that it's going to guarantee people aren't going to attempt. So
to go, wait a minute, maybe this isn't right for me, and I'm going to continue doing it until the Lord comes and takes me home. And that's my mission, is to stop people from unnecessary surgery and stop the advocates from lying to people about them being able to change their gender.
Very cool. You speak your truth, brother. Speak your truth. Speak your truth. Like, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to have resources for detransitioners. I don't think we talk about detransitioning enough. But like, that was very biased, obviously.